Good afternoon now, and welcome back to the NWR Communications Vantage Point Conference. Up next, we have our ESG panel discussion. We haven't publicly released this until now, but NWR Communications is obviously an investor relations firm with a number of listed clients. ESG is a very topical and growing space, and we've just formed a joint venture with leading fund manager Alliston Capital to conduct an ESG advisory business. So on the line today, we have Olivia Pitt, who's the head of ESG at Alliston, and Lauren Bromfield, who's our first inaugural Anabranch ESG advisory employee, which we're very lucky to have. Just to kick off, I might just throw it over to Olivia and Lauren just to give a quick intro in terms of themselves before we get stuck into more of a ESG discussion. Olivia,
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Sure. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. So thanks, Simon. As said, my name is Olivia Pitt. I'm the head of ESG at Alliston Capital. Also involved with the Anabranch ESG advisory team here with Lauren. So background really quickly, been in ESG for about 10 years, seen it from various different perspectives, been in sort of local government, been in consulting and advisory, and now sat in the sort of funds management finance space for a while. So seeing it from all sorts of perspectives. Lauren?
Hi guys, I'm Lauren Bromfield. So my background is in accounting. I have worked with both public and private companies for a number of years, and that sets me up really well to work with companies and guide them with ESG.
Perfect. Thanks, Lauren. So I might just get started in terms of very broad brush general questions on ESG, and those that are online, feel free to submit any questions via the Q&A panel at the bottom of the screen as well. But Olivia, maybe just a quick elevator pitch in terms of what is ESG and why should ESG be considered by listed companies?
Sure. So there's plenty of acronyms in the world. We don't need any more, right? So ESG stands for environmental, social, and governance. And look, it is everything non-financial that a company can interact with. So let's break it down. E, environmental, we could look at things like climate change, waste, biodiversity, resource depletion, and interaction with animals, that sort of whole environmental sphere. S then looks at social. So that is how the various stakeholders around your business are interacted with. So that's your community, that's your employees, that's your shareholders, investors, regulators, that whole spectrum. So it's looking at things like health and safety. It's looking at your community investment style, your community engagement style. And then G, governance, so the structures that sit around your business. That could be the ethics that you have in place. That could be any of the actual structures around the board and sort of who sits there, the diversity of said board, the skills there. And it sort of packages nicely into something that does feel mildly intangible, but actually is everything non-financial. And look, the second part of your question there, Simon, why should companies consider this? Well, other than the fact it's almost becoming regulated in many parts of the world and soon to be in Australia, it also helps with various different aspects. Look, from an investor perspective, we see it from, you have risk associated to ESG. It could be if you are a heavily polluting company for carbon emissions, there might be a future carbon price set on your business, and that could skyrocket for all we know. Some modeling is already suggesting it's going to be over $50 a ton. That could start hurting your bottom line pretty substantially. It's also, considered when there's a health and safety event at the organization that could impact your share price. So knowing and understanding the risk that sits around ESG. Excuse me. Regulatory landscapes as well. Look, I half mentioned it. It's coming, it's impending, it's more than just a tick box exercise at this point. And some of these laws and acts that are setting in Australia in particular are fairly substantial. We're even thinking of reducing the Modern Slavery Act threshold down to just 50 million consolidated revenue. And that hits quite a lot more companies than the original law that had 100 million consolidated revenue, So if you are in that threshold, you will have to look into your supply chain into as many tiers as you can to try and determine where the risk sits of modern slavery and human rights infringements. It's a pretty substantial and quite eye-opening sort of process for a company to go through. I don't know if you've ever had to sort of think about the things that you buy, Simon and Lauren, like really, yes, you could buy a t-shirt from somewhere, but where did that t-shirt come from? And it's the same with these companies and any of the sort of small industrials and all of that sit in this world. Where do you buy that wrench? Where are you procuring your electricity, and how is the building being manufactured? And like, are the people that are doing this, are they paid well, and are they given the rights that they should be expected as a human? It's quite substantial, isn't it, Simon?
It's broad brush for sure. That's for sure. And just in terms of ESG, and not necessarily specific to Allison Capital, but just in terms of institutions and fund managers, how they look at ESG and why it's so important for companies. Can you just sort of talk about how that looks from a, not a box ticking exercise, but how it basically gets screened out and the importance around having a proper ESG in place?
Yeah. So a lot of ESG is all about data. And what does the company have to report around ESG? So do they have their carbon emission profile? Are they aware of their impact to the environment? Are they aware of the diversity across their organization or the supply chain risks and all of that stuff? And what that means to sort of me as an investor, if I put my investor hat on, it gives us data points to use when it comes to understanding whether a company is going to be it's undervalued at present or could be revalued in the future, knowing how sincerely they're taking some of these perceived risks around ESG and potential future risks, right? So what I would do, for example, and what my peers across this whole industry would do is search for a company's understanding of these risks, and data points is a really key way of doing that if they're reporting and disclosing this information. And then sort of determine that, see how they're doing against maybe their peers, see how they're doing against larger benchmarks as well. And it could be that these companies are leading in their small spaces and they don't quite realize it yet. So then we go, okay, great. We really like the look of how they're managing, say, health and safety, just to pick a really easy one. There's been 0 fatalities, they've had very little injury rates and all of that. So they're taking this very seriously. They have good reporting mechanisms in-house. They might have, highly efficient machinery and all of that stuff. So it really just changes the way we see a company. And then if you were to look at the flip side, this sort of screen out sort of comment that you said earlier, Simon, if a company is not really disclosing a lot of this information, it can be perceived, absolutely, it can be perceived as they do not care, right? And perhaps they don't have the capability, perhaps they don't have the capacity. We don't necessarily know that unless they tell us. So if we don't understand a company's health and safety profile, we might not necessarily invest in them, even if they have a glowing, financial record, because we are unsure about the risk that they may sit. And sometimes it's truly just a dialogue that is needed to happen to hear that, yes, they're looking into it and all of that stuff, but at face value, if it's not sort of out there reported, understood, talked about, how can we possibly really look into this and consider it as a future investment for us?
And in terms of from a legislative point of view, with regards to within Australia in particular, what does that sort of look like now in terms of that's regulated, and where do you sort of think that is likely to go? Yeah,
so I'll take health and safety sort of out. I keep using that as an example because it's really, most companies are quite aware of health and safety and what that means. But current legislation, look, I've mentioned the Australian Modern Slavery Act. That only came through in about 2019 or so, and that requires companies of currently 100 million consolidated revenue, but potentially soon to be just 50 million, to look into the risk of modern slavery within their operations and supply chain. Again, as I said, very difficult process to go through, really just delving into your suppliers and who are the suppliers for your suppliers. And before you know it, you go offshore, right? Very quickly, especially in this region. So then you're, what are you trying to delve into areas in mainland China for where you found a part? Very difficult to do. And then aside from modern slavery, we've also got impending climate-related disclosure rules. So I'm going to call it the TCFD here, but really it's truly just looking at climate-related risk for your business and if they can put a financial metric against that risk. Again, because of quite kind of words out loud at this point, but to put that on a page, what will the future, say if we do sadly go into a sort of continued climate change related events in Australia, extreme weather events, extreme temperature increases, decreases, whatever it sort of ends up being in this part of the world. what will that cost to the business? You know, we could look at it from an insurance cost. We can look at it from people being able to live nearby to commute to work. There are all sort of costs that sit around climate change and what it could bring. And we're sadly currently on a trajectory that doesn't look great for the world when it comes to climate change. So we can consider this as quite an actual risk that might happen to us. So being able to price that and then tell the market, oh, you know what? It's not going to affect us that deeply, or it is going to affect us quite deeply. So we are making changes X, Y, and Z in preparation for the next, say, 20, 30 years of our operations. So it's quite a powerful tool, right? Sorry, go on.
Oh, no, I was going to say definitely.
Yeah.
Just obviously, the impact and significance of any of that regulation, and it's already basically here as well.
Yeah.
That sort of probably puts us aimed towards Anabranch ESG advisory. Why set up that joint venture between Alliston and NWR? Can you just, whether it's Olivia or Lauren, can you just talk to that in terms of the background to it and the why?
Yeah. So how about I do a quick background part, and then Lauren, please take over, because people don't need to hear my British accent anymore. Okay. So Alliston does focus a lot across all sort of investment spheres, but we do have a sort of fairly substantial sort of small cap, micro cap space as well. What we have found is that there has been limited ESG information disclosed by these companies. We know that it is mainly because, it's not because they don't care, it is simply because they might not have their capability, capacity, resource, time, understanding, all of these things for them to be able to do this. So this is a problem from us as investor hat back on. This is a problem. We want to understand these companies more, and they haven't been able to tell us about some of these metrics. So ergo, we've partnered with Simon and the team at NWR to create Anabranch ESG Advisory. This is quite separate from us, and Lauren's going to sort of take the wheel from here. But please go ahead.
No, so I was just saying, so at Anabranch, so we do recognise that ESG considerations and commitments have largely been dominated by those largest listed companies in our region, as Simon and Olivia have said, which has left smaller companies really uncertain about how to proceed without significant discretionary budgets. With that, we've set out to develop a solution that specifically assists smaller companies to guide them on their ESG journey. And really, it is our goal to democratise ESG by providing accessible and practical guidance to all businesses, regardless of their size or resources. So, yeah.
Anything more to add there, Olivia?
It's such an interesting space, isn't it? You know, if I was a small company owner and I'm looking up the chain and I'm looking at Qantas and I'm looking at Woolworths, I'm looking at these sort of much larger companies with far larger, discretionary spend budgets. I'm going, how on earth do I get to that sort of level of ESG maturity? And there's a big wide world of ESG out there, and changing legislation, and even the risk of greenwashing, which we haven't even spoken about yet, Simon. Often the first step is the hardest, right? It's the same as if you were to, I want to lose 10 kilos in a month. Okay, how do you do that? You start, you have to start somewhere. So the first step often is the hardest. And what we've created here as part of the product offerings at Anabranch is to guide those first couple of crucial steps. And we've sort of set it up as a reverse consulting. Okay, we know what the problem is already. You don't need to tell us the problem. We know what it is. And so here is how we would provide you with guidance and advice to actually make those first steps and try and solve said problem.
Yeah.
Big scary ESG world out there, and it does not have to be.
And in terms of, we won't go into the sort of real detail around the product offerings and whatnot, but basically, it comes down to a couple of different offerings in terms of, as you sort of say, making a start in terms of, again, not just a ticking box exercise, but you're going on that journey. And then the next step from there is a more in-depth and almost like a maintenance, an advancement from there on in. Is that a good way of describing it?
Yeah. So at Anabranch, we do offer a full suite of ESG services, but we have divided this into 4 milestone ESG products, which is basically crafted to be engaged as a company's ESG appetite increases. So the first step within those services is our ESG foundations. And part of this service offering will work with companies side by side to determine what their material ESG issues are, what's most important to the business, stakeholders, and assist in establishing relevant targets and the development of an ESG strategy. So that's the first part. We would really come on site and hear from the team and visit any facilities to understand the company's operations. And we're looking for like a hands-on approach here, and doing this via workshops with the management teams in person to ensure a really structured conversation. Then as companies mature, we can then provide our additional offerings, which include ESG review and ESG benchmarking, which both look to understand how companies performed against their peers and within their industry. And we can also provide other bespoke ESG advisory work outside of this process. Between those 4 milestone events, our accountability package, which includes ESG disclosures and ESG monitoring, is designed to maintain ESG momentum by providing reporting and general guidance based on the outputs of ESG foundations. So we've designed these accountability products with an annuity feature to support the integration of ESG into the company before stepping onto the next milestone.
Yeah, so really just pulling back to my consulting in the ESG days when I was at Ernst & Young EY. What would happen is that, we would go on site and we would sort of solve a big problem that the company was having and then walk away. And then we have no idea how it's sort of embedded or how it's sitting and how people are feeling about it, if it needs to mature or change or in any way. So what we've created here is a sort of almost like a retainer kind of process for this accountability package that we're calling it. So, we've done the work, we've come on site, we've had great rapport, we've enjoyed our time, and we've given you something to take away and think about. And now we can check in every month or every whatever sort of time frame is and see how it's going. See if we can give you some more guidance, see if we can advise you further. It could be that something's not quite fitting right. Great, let's get back on and let's suss it out and get stuck in again. But I think that's quite a powerful tool and not something that I've seen elsewhere in other sort of ESG sort of advising sort of spaces. It's the hands-on approach, right?
Yeah, and I think that's, and we're extremely fortunate to have the experience in terms of, Alliston, with regards to what, if we were to start from scratch, would be scratching a lot. So whereas having, head of ESG, guiding along that journey and what's important, what's not important, and actually real outcomes, I think that's sort of critical to the offering. Just sort of pivoting towards, probably got sort of 5 or so minutes left, just in terms of a few different questions that have sort of come through. In terms of, the challenges or barriers to ASX listed companies typically encountering when implementing ESG initiatives, what are these typically and how they're best to overcome them?
Look, I'm happy to start, but please, Lauren, you jump in as well. Look, sort of half mentioned already, often it's sort of capability and capacity on site, right? Like these might be companies of 7 people less and stuff like that. There's not necessarily going to be an ESG expert in the space. So, and it's it's obviously it's entirely learnable, but perhaps we don't have the time or resources to go and do that. So often it's about awareness and education for these companies, and just third partying it usually helps. It's quite efficient. And some of the packages that Anabranch is suggesting is almost like, I'm calling it a mini secondee, right? So it would be, we touch base, we sort of see how you're going. That's the time to really utilize the education and upskilling part, if of interest and if of appetite for the company as well. Excuse me. Data availability and quality. Look, I've talked about that as well. It is difficult to set any ESG related targets, really put anything out there into the world if you're really unsure about the quality of your data. So that is a challenge. The world and its mother is trying to offer ESG data packages and stuff like that, but really let's get the foundations sorted first, and then we can absolutely go online with some brand spanking new shiny platform that can consolidate all of your ESG metrics together. And also, sorry, jump in.
No, I was going to say, and also stakeholder engagement, and that's where we come in as well. We can help engage your stakeholders and get their support to help implement those ESG strategies and what's important to them also. So, yeah.
I think I said at the top, and nearing the end, the importance of actually delivering real outcomes, not just a box ticking exercise, is incredibly important to companies. Liv, maybe you can just talk to, and I was educated by you on this, not me, but just in terms of companies that are well thought out and execute ESG strategies in terms of access to green bonds and whatnot, that it's not just being a good corporate citizen, but actually can have real benefit.
Yeah, I would love to say you should do this because it's the right thing to do. It is, absolutely, but there's also sort of financial implications on the other side as well. Look, sometimes you actually have access to new forms of capital if you have, ESG sort of out there and being talked about by your business. It's, if I was just to use a general fund manager example, this is nothing to do with us. Sometimes a company might be screened out from an investable universe purely because they're not talking about ESG. It's that simple. And we have, they just have no idea what's going on there. And you have to enforce a dialogue to actually understand what's happening. There's also, sometimes there's lower cost of capital as well. Sometimes there is, as you mentioned, Simon, access to sustainability linked loans, SLL, or green bonds or social linked loans. There's a whole suite out there. And some of our very large banks here in Australia are they're all fighting each other to try and be the #1 provider of said sustainability linked loans or bonds. So there's definitely great rates and returns that can be achieved there. And for you to have access to these, you just need a bit of ESG data and a nice target, like a solid target, and then sort of steps to achieve said target. And often you can get a loan or even a bond associated to these initiatives that you have in place. We've seen, it's a really simple Google search or flick through the AFR at any point and you'll see various companies are setting out new loans or bonds that are associated to sustainability and ESG metrics.
And probably that's really helpful, Liv, and thanks. Probably one of the last ones before we have to head off. Just you touched on greenwashing. We obviously don't want to go anywhere near that.
Yes.
Just in terms of how companies can fall afoul, and basically by having whether it's outsourced or internal, having the right people guiding and basically keeping them honest that. Just by ticking the box and you're actually getting yourselves in a fair bit of trouble. Can you just talk to that?
Yeah. Look, how about I just sort of take a bit high level and Lauren, please jump in. So the risk of greenwashing is very real. We've seen it in the newspapers. We've seen ASIC and the ACCC are sniffing around. We know that. The risk sits when a company says something publicly or discloses something publicly that isn't substantiated as much as they should do. Okay, so it's all well and good by saying, hey, look, random example, this mine site will always have 0 fatalities on it. This is going to be a 0 fatality mine site. That is said with the absolute best intentions, right? And perhaps you do have strong sort of safety mechanisms in place, but have they been audited? Have we really double, triple, quadruple check this? And then can we actually verify said statement? And perhaps there's mine sites with 0 people on it. Great, that is absolutely not going to have a human-based fatality, is it? So it's sort of being quite critical of these really well-to-do, really wholesome comments that these companies would really like to make, and just knowing that it's got to sit behind it, a bit of a plan, a bit of a pathway. And so, look, a part of what Anabranch is looking at is just making sure that these comments are structured, thorough, and can stand up quite strongly when said publicly.
It's a very good summary. We're right on end time. Olivia and Lauren, thanks so much for your time, and really looking forward to launching in earnest. We've got our first few clients all ready to rock and roll. But the enthusiasm and passion for the space from both of you is not hard to miss. So looking forward to getting it started. But if there's any questions that pop up, we're always here to answer them. But thanks so much, girls.
Absolutely right. Have a great time the rest of the conference. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.